one of the first people we ever worked for had this quote, which I think is like something we stand by now and is our North Star, is you can write a great script, and if you have an okay cast, you'll have an okay show. And you can write an okay script, and if you have a great cast, you'll have a great show.
Whenever I have people as accomplished as y'all, I actually love to go back to the beginning and ask, what was your first job in this industry? You know, did you start as somebody's intern? Were you like running around fetching coffee? Where did it all begin in this glamorous job? And we'll start at this end.
Pat and I were interns together at A Band Apart Productions.
Wait, Tarantino's company?
Tarantino's company, although we never saw him once. Yeah, we never saw him once, and we worked in commercials and music videos back when those were things. And I think I was from San Diego, went to San Diego State, and I sent out 50 letters to every production company I'd find saying, will you let me intern for the summer? And The Band Apart was the only one that answered.
Wow. And that's where you two met?
Yeah, it was in between my junior and senior year at University of Texas in Austin. And
no claps for that.
No, nothing.
None.
Come on,
Matthew McConaughey burst through the wall. You can't miss an opportunity to hook him. Anyways, yeah, we met that summer, and we didn't really like hang out until like, I don't know, it was like the last couple of weeks, I want to say, and then we realized that we were living like 5 blocks away from each other, and Justin was living in a condemned frat house that he had no affiliation with other than they were willing to give him a room for like $100 a month, and it looked like the Fight Club house, and it was horrible. So he just wanted to be out of there as much as possible. So at the time, Westwood, where we were living, had like 9 movie theaters, and I think we bonded over our mutual love of Pootie Tang. And then the rest was kind of history, and we just stayed in touch.
Not sure if that movie holds up, but
it does. I watched it like last week.
No.
It's great.
It didn't hold up 5 minutes after it came out, if we're being honest, but it's still great. John, for you?
My resume doesn't make a lot of sense, but it really doesn't. But I was an actor, and I am an actor.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right.
Just, nothing recently, but no. But I had written a play that I was in, starring me, and
directed by you.
Directed it was directed by a friend, but it was a one-man play. But at the time, everyone was it was an actual play, but I was playing all the parts, and then I adapted that into a screenplay just out of just curiosity, and then we sold that.
Oh wow!
And so it made that sort of transition into writing, and then
Did it get made?
It did.
What's the movie?
Oh, it's nothing you could find. It's
Mission Impossible.
No, I know exactly. But it was a start. So it was starring Diane Keaton and Maury Chaykin and myself, and it was in the very last throes of the time of the Disney Channel making original movies that were sort of in the vein of the classier ones that they were doing before Hannah Montana. But I mean, you know what I mean? It was they would do, I love Hannah Montana, but they were just they were Britishy or something, Irish and Britishy. So this had a sort of flavor like that. But that was my way in the first time. And then, a lot of struggle and nothing in between.
Wow. Courtney, for you?
Okay, so I went to school in New York, and I thought I was going to be a novelist, like a lot of people, and I wasn't very good at it, and I liked money too much. So I had to figure something else out, and after failing at journalism, I got incredibly lucky and won a writing fellowship here in Los Angeles at Nickelodeon, a program they still have. It was the first year of their program, and I wrote a Simpsons spec when I was still living in New York. And I got incredibly lucky because I think this early in the internet days, people didn't know about it. And that script won me a fellowship, and I moved out here, and and I got an apartment. It was like, it gave me a place to go for a solid year, not knowing a single soul. And then after that, just got lucky, kept writing. But yeah, it was I'm the word nerd, so yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. I have to know, what was the plot to your Simpsons script? The A and B story.
Plot. The A story was, it was like, it's like the way I tell the story, it dates me so much because I went to a Borders bookstore, which I don't know exists anymore,
oh, wow.
and I bought a book of Frasier scripts, and I did not know how to format anything. And I wrote a Simpsons episode. You remember that episode where George, was it HW or
moves across the street?
HW moves across the street.
Bad neighbor.
I copied that, but it was a black guy, basically.
Oh!
And so they had black neighbors, and he was trying not to insult them, and he was trying to figure out like culturally what was going on. It was a total ripoff of like the Frank Grimes story and the HW story.
Wow.
But you know what? More people should have applied.
You actually just mentioned one of my all-time favorite Simpsons episodes and my all-time least favorite.
Oh, which one?
Yeah. Frank Grimes depresses the hell out of me.
Oh, it's the greatest episode. I love that one so much.
People love that episode. It makes me so sad.
So perfect.
Oh, man. I'm going to be depressed all night. Meaghan, for you?
I was a child actor, so my first job was playing like a little bitchy girl on Even Stevens. And I got to like blow off Shia LaBeouf, and I had to wear a bra for the first time, which was traumatizing and probably why I quit shortly after. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting because, this is on an audience of actors and we really want to get into the casting process. But I was going to ask if any of you had an acting background because you all seem to have such a healthy respect for actors in the craft. Do you mind if I ask in like the least crass way possible, John and Meaghan, sort of why you stepped away from acting?
I think the lack of control is really hard. I think also just for me personally, it wasn't a healthy way to, I'm quite a dark writer and I was quite a dark actor as well. And I think with writing, it's not living in your body in the same way. And I found it hard not to be masochistic about it with the acting. But also the lack of control, I think, is just not something I can handle. And I think I also see actors struggling with it. When actors aren't able to let go of control, I think it can, unless they are actually a producer, it can hurt the project. And I think it's just really important to be able to do.
John, for you?
Yes. First of all, it's so nice to see so many people here. Thank you for coming out for this. It's very sweet. As I never know what we're walking into. It's so nice to see so many people. But no, honestly, I don't think of it as stepping away because it still is something that's sort of within me. And I think I was talking to my cousin Patty last week, and she was saying how, when I was 5, we went to New Jersey to visit our cousins for Thanksgiving, and I, at 5 years old, was sort of like holding court at like a 20-person table at Thanksgiving with a story I was telling, and I kind of remembered that, and I actually think that's the root of everything. It's sort of like we're all storytellers, so however you can best do it. I just found that when I was acting, I would be similarly sort of the thought of like, oh God, I worked so hard to get in this thing that this person wrote, and I'm embarrassed to invite anyone to it. Or like, oh my God, I would get, I would work in TV, and sometimes you're just like, oh God, I hope this doesn't go on too long because I think it's terrible. Or, it's all of that kind of situation that panics me. And ultimately it was always sort of the feeling underneath it. Like, why are we doing this when I feel like, and shaping a story was really the bottom for me and everything. And so, that's always the same thing, but it certainly has helped working on this show because the communication with the actors is so delightful, and being able to sort of have confidence about that and how an actor thinks is very valuable.
Have you ever, have you cast yourself in your own show at all? Been like a neighbor kind of like walking by in the building?
I know, because they've brought it up and they've said, do you, and I said, I think it'll ruin the show for me. And okay, so, but there is, Really, I like if I see myself in it, and frankly, I have. So here's a tiny thing. I do not speak. I accepted this one thing that the director in the finale of the season that's playing right now asked me to do, and it was an offer that I sort of couldn't refuse, and you'll probably see why. But I don't speak, and I was sort of like cutting myself to shreds in the editing room because I was like, I can't. Every time I see myself, the show is ruined.
What about the rest of you? Do you have a performance background, or where did you sort of, develop this love and respect for actors?
I think I developed it because I'm terrible at it. Could never do it, and it terrifies me to do it. And I think just seeing actors be able to... one of the first people we ever worked for had this quote, which I think is like something we stand by now and is our North Star, is you can write a great script, and if you have an okay cast, you'll have an okay show. And you can write an okay script, and if you have a great cast, you'll have a great show. And I think that, seeing somebody take something that you wrote and make it so much better than what you put on the page, it's like the most exciting thing in the world. So I think just being able to see the more we do it, I think the more you get to see all of the kind of like technical skills that go into it, all the tiny little choices that are made all throughout a performance, and getting to see that built is really remarkable. I'm a big sports fan, and to me, it's like watching great actors, like, watching Steph Curry shoot threes. It's like, it's an incredible thing to watch.
Shoot threes? Oh, like 3-pointers?
3-pointers.
I'm vaguely familiar with this. This is a bunch of actors, remember?
No, that's okay.
Vaguely familiar with the concept. It's a good thing. For you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My mom was a musical theater major at the University of Missouri, and she just...
Wait, that gets more than...
I got a cheer.
Austin?
Yeah.
Wow. Huge theater program there, huh?
Ooh, Austin, yay, Missouri.
Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, that probably is where it came from in the beginning. And yeah, I mean, if you count being in local McDonald's Happy Meal commercials in St. Louis, then I guess I was an actor when I was a child.
That's an actor. Wow.
Yeah. But no, I quickly gave that up when I was about 8 years old and realized that I was not good at it. But yeah, I don't know. It's funny, like you guys were talking about just the idea of like control and that sort of thing. And just from like an outsider's perspective, we cast Quinta in this pilot, Quinta Brunson, who created Abbott Elementary. We cast her in the CW pilot that we did like 5 years ago in Vancouver. And that's like how we know Quinta. And we got up to Vancouver and like, we're like 5 days into shooting. And then she turns to me and she's like, Pat, if this gets picked up to series, do I have to move to Vancouver? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, okay. And then it didn't get picked up. And then she's like, I think I'm going to create my own show that shoots in LA. So,
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Courtney, what about for you?
I wasn't really around actors that much until I came out here and was on a show. And even I think one of the things that's like so... everybody's kind of siloed in the business. It's like I was in a writer's room for ages, and a lot of shows you don't go on set that much, or it's kind of like you're just not really privy to a lot of that process and editing and all that kind of stuff. So for me, it kind of came a little bit like what Justin and Patrick are talking about through just seeing the magic that actors bring to it, but also just like a gradual learning about how the whole thing works. And, as I think the things writers we have to do is to understand that like it is not about us as much as we would love for it to be about us. It's ultimately about the story. We know that, and working in concert with actors to bring a story, and again, going back to what Patrick said, I'm a sports fan as well. And like sports is great because it's usually binaries, winning and losing. If you're trying to win, if you're trying to succeed and the story is the thing, then you can sit there and say as a writer, my way of doing the things, my control isn't as important as getting the thing to be successful, which they don't tune in for writing. It's all acting. It's like actors and it's the faces. That's who people care about. And then you start to kind of realize how this process works and how this business works. And you kind of are labeled, like, to me, I got to let go a little bit, because you're just, the whole thing is like, if I can get these individuals, and it goes across from executives to other writers, to all that other kind of stuff. I realized my job was to get them to believe in our project enough and to evidence it enough through the work that you could get something that would be really special. So like, to me, it had to be a whole kind of like holistic growing approach where I just put ego aside, and then actors become as vital a piece of the puzzle as everybody on the production in a way. So that, I mean, it was not always easy, I'll say that, but like that was kind of what it took.
Can I just interrupt quickly? Because his sister also is a direct connection with the actors. And actually, his sister is one of the great casting directors on our show, Destiny Lilly.
Oh,
so I just found that out. So I'm all excited about it. I'm all about it.
Oh, yeah. She's great. She's always loved actors. And I think even for us, like the sibling rivalry thing, with words, it's exactly like you said with control. I could sit there and say, this is how the joke is going to be done. And I remember when again, certain shows like Jessica Walter on Arrested Development and, Jennifer Lewis on Blackish, like they were so very good, and comedy is so very hard. And the writer John Levinstein talked about when Jessica Walter passed away, it was such a compliment to me as a comedic actress and an actor, like if she didn't hit the joke, then the joke was wrong, you know? And so when you're seeing that kind of thing, I got to be around absolute greatness and that kind of thing. So you get humbled quickly, and then you start to respect how it is and you get out of your own ego because you want it to be the perfect little thing that you imagined in your head. And it's never going to be that. And as soon as you start sharing it, it becomes a better thing,
To that end, how much do you appreciate improvising? I'm guessing you probably can't stop Martin Short. Whether
that is a big surprise, actually, on the show. Yeah, I would have expected it, and the big surprise for me was I was terrified to turn in any comedy script to Steve Martin and Martin Short. I mean, I was just like petrified, but they were the warmest, most lovely people, and the barometer of like truth was so interesting, not expected either, where Marty would be like, John, there's one line that just feels way too broad. And I was like, and I wasn't prepared in the first season. I was just like, wow, I'm excited by that note from Marty. He thinks that's too far.
Wow.
And it really, though, he really has this like, thing about it, but it's only in very specific ways. Steve, similarly, as a writer himself, it's that balance of generosity and understanding with a writer, and so giving that to them. But when there is the script, they've usually been incredibly welcoming and lovely about it. And then when they have it, they come in to set with the thing in their sights that they want to nail.
Sorry, I don't know what that was.
Oh, sure. But the thing in their sights that they want to nail. And so improving, many times I'll be like, okay, freedom take. Let's do a freedom take at the end of getting everything we needed. And the freedom take looks a lot like the take prior. Yeah. And it's not like there isn't like, they don't feel the need to go beyond because they're on story.
Yeah, I sort of look at it as like improv is like someone picking up a blowtorch. I'm like, it's really cool when they know how to use it, but I'm always super nervous. I'm like, oh fuck, they're holding a blowtorch. And then they start to use it. I'm like, oh, they know how to use this thing. This is great. But a lot of times I'm like, no, put down the blowtorch. Like, don't touch that thing ever. So it just, I think, depends on, I always get nervous, but I think it depends on, when you see somebody who can really do it, you're like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like finding all these little things that they normally wouldn't have found. But certainly, I think one of the reasons I think for me it makes me nervous is, there's a story we're trying to tell that has beats that we need to hit, that has, especially in comedy, like that story has to be told within the sort of comedic timing of the show. And so even if you nail something and you have the funniest piece of improv ever, if it's not like within the sort of flow of the story, it can throw the story off and it can just feel like an aside. And so I think I love it when people are really, really good at it. I get nervous though all the time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like Abbott's 21 and a half minutes. That's all we get. Yeah. Courtney knows. And you have to be so efficient. And so, oftentimes with Abbott, we're not like word perfect or anything, but like we definitely like stick to the script, at least for, most of the takes. And then with like Harley Quinn, you get somebody in there like JB Smoove. Yeah. And he could take up a quarter of your episode runtime just riffing on like lobster. Yeah. And he's done it. Yeah. So, there's definitely, I mean, we get a little bit more flexibility on Harley, I suppose, than Abbott. But yeah, it's like the broadcast model. It's like you have to be so efficient. It's got to be so lean. And like Randall Einhorn, who is our producing director, will always like put things into perspective of like percentages of like the episode. Like if somebody goes off on a tangent and it's 30 seconds, he's like, well, there, that's 1/40th of our episode, right? That kind of thing. And you're like, yeah. He's not a buzzkill the whole time.
The whole time. Has Mr. Johnson ever improvised something from his past that you then had to be like, well, I guess he was in the Illuminati? Or are those?
I guess he was definitely in the Illuminati.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, everything he says is true.
Everything
right?
he says is true. That's
Yeah.
right. No, Stan is like every time William Stanford Davis, every time he like reads the script at the table reading stuff, like he gets excited about any weird thing that gets added on to his sort of mythology. So he doesn't need to really improv because we've created the most batshit backstory possible for him that he just delights in it.
Are there things that you've rejected? Like, oh, we can't say he shot Kennedy or something like that.
Yeah, what did we reject?
Well, I had asked Stan, as Mr. Johnson, to call somebody Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I definitely will be voting for this November.
Yeah, Stan was like,
do I have to say that? I was like, Stan, you never asked for anything. You do not have to say that.
Courtney and Meaghan?
My show's not a comedy, so
And there's a mystery.
less improvising. But there is some. I mean, my thing is always let's get the scene as it's written, because with episodic TV, there are things that you forget that might seem like they don't matter, but then in 4 episodes they matter a lot. So I always say let's get it as written, and then we can mess around. But what I do is after. Once I've cast the people, I definitely start using their voice as I write and adapt the scripts to their voice. And there's certain actors, like Grace Van Patten, who plays the lead of my show, is just so good. If she can't make a line work, then it's the script, And so, yeah, there's certain actors that definitely have more input than others.
And they might know their character better than anyone at this point.
Yeah.
It's funny because improv always gets brought up, and especially in comedy panels.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's, to me, it's like part of the illusion and the sleight of hand of it all. Because it's like the way an audience will sit there and go like, I bet they're friends in real life. It's like they're sometimes so good at doing the thing that they do that you imagine that they're just riffing on it and making it up as they go along. Because like even the shows I've worked on where people would assume the most improvisation, generally very tightly scripted, and it's just like what everybody's saying. We're here first to tell a story, and it is a little bit of like what people are really skilled at. And I always, again, to use another sports analogy, like these things are like the NBA of it all. It's like the top of the top of the top in a lot of ways. And you're like, you don't have your guy who's not a great 3-point shooter taking shots that Steph Curry would make. And so like, if you don't have great improvisers, you have good improvisers and you want a great show, you may not put them in that position. While also, again, making sure that they feel heard, that they're having fun, and you talk about things, and like, look, we were on Blackish, we'd have these office scenes with these very funny characters, and they would improvise a little bit more. They would come back on Wednesday and see the show and be like, how come that wasn't in there? And they never quite caught on that we were never using any of it. But like, it was also fun for them to do, and there was no reason to shut it down.
Sure.
We knew it would work. We knew we'd get our 21 minutes and 21 and a half. And so we knew what we were doing, but like, it was... you're all doing personality management, and they wanted to have fun, so great. Let's run a bunch of stuff we know will never be on the air.
All of your shows, Tell Me Lies, with the exception of Grace Van Patten, I'm not sure I was familiar with the cast. What was it like? Did you sort of have carte blanche to cast newer faces, and was that freeing, or was there any pressure put on you to maybe look for names?
Initially, we had a little bit of not pressure, but obviously people always want names, and I thought a lot about normal people, and just those characters we didn't know who they were, and they just are that couple, and I really wanted that. I wanted us to not have a story behind these actors coming into the show, so we just fought really hard to be able to cast pretty new people, and it was wonderful, because sometimes you get pressured into casting a name who is not the best person for the script. And it was definitely it was the longest casting process I've ever been a part of. I feel like I saw every actor between 18 and 30. But yeah, it was great. And it's just so wonderful working with people who are newer because they're so excited to be there and they're not jaded and they just show up to work every day feeling so lucky to have the job. And it just makes sets so much more fun when you feel like you're giving a big opportunity to someone new.
You also, your show is actually adapted from a novel, so there might be like a preconceived idea of what these characters should be or should look like. But once you bring on the cast, and especially as you're moving into season 2 and so forth, how much do the actors sort of inform the performance, if at all?
Well, the book is very different than the show, and I think most of the ensemble characters are not really at all like the characters in the book. Steven, I really wanted to get right just because he's so specific, and that's why he was the hardest person to cast. I think they influence the show just in terms of their voices and knowing their strengths and their weaknesses. I try now to write, for instance, there's a character called Wrigley on our show, and he plays this like kind of silly football player, and I had no idea how much heart Spencer House was going to bring to the role, and he did one scene where he started to cry in season 1. I was like, oh my God, this guy is just so much deeper than what he's been given. And so in season 2, we got to write him a really crazy arc that I think I'm just so happy because he absolutely killed it. So yeah, I think you also do a lot of protecting of the actors because some people are better at some things and not other things.
John, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you knew you were writing for Steve Martin and Martin Short. It's so funny because like their dynamic on that show is pretty much what I've seen in real life, which is that Martin just teases him nonstop and he takes it. Yeah. And then Selena looks confused because they're making all these references to things she's never heard of. Yeah.
Gold.
But you also you've utilized some incredible Broadway actors that I see on your show, and also I love that I don't want to say discovered because I knew who he was, but people like Michael Cyril Creighton, who has been brought into the show as a regular out of all the people in the Arconia. I'm sort of curious when you set out to make this ensemble, what were you looking for, and were you open to people who weren't as well known along with these very recognizable faces?
Yeah, season 4 is the most known cast in history of comedy television show. I feel like probably, but at the beginning, and we always like that balance for the show, but from the beginning, that was partly it. Just sort of my own acting background. I was from New York and loved the theater and always dreamed of making a show in New York. For the reason of bringing character actors and friends that I love and friends, Jane Howdyshell, who played Bunny in season 1 is a dear friend of mine.
And you killed her.
I killed her. Yeah. But that's not such a bad thing. She had a really good episode or 7 in the next season. But it was hard to tell her I was killing her. Yeah.
Really?
But she had a show she was doing. Anyway.
That softens the blow.
Yeah, no, that was the dream. And a lot of times it was Destiny, our conversations with Destiny and casting directors who know the off-Broadway, the off-Broadway actor who was incredible in this thing, and they've gone and seen this thing. So they're bringing people in that you haven't seen that are incredible. And I loved peopling the show just because the show is specifically New York as well, and you want, actors like Jackie Hoffman or, Teddy Kaluka, who's our doorman Lester, who are just, New York in their bones. And Michael is someone I had known of. And it was one of those moments of watching an audition. That part for Howard was just a 2-episode part in season 1, really, in our minds, but it was very specific casting. So we saw the greatest character actors for that, and I was like, oh my God, I would go if I gave you the list. You'd be like, how do you pick? And Michael he did one thing. We were, it was during the pandemic during then, and so we were live, just having auditions over Zoom, and he came in and he had a scene that was probably 5 pages long. And he did it all the way through, letter perfect, everything solidly perfect. And then I said, can you do it one more time? And gave him a completely different direction, a completely much darker underneath, bitter underneath direction. And watched him transform the material, again, letter perfect for 5 pages with a completely different take. He just blew me away. And that's just when you have someone who, for me, there's not a thing he utters. He's like Madeline Kahn, who is, I think, is the one he worships. But, just everything out of their mouth just makes you laugh. So that you hang on to, and we have.
There's a reason that like every movie he's in the trailer. He always like shows up with like the punchline.
Oh, he's a delight. Yeah, he's great.
But you have such a great cast. Did you find yourself writing more and more for him, and then asking him to be a regular? Out of all the people you could have asked.
Yeah, and it's also that thing. You're in the atmosphere of greats. And so you're getting the benefit of their take on someone on set too, and they're like, okay, that one, I love, and they're like just raving about him and many others, and then you've only got again like a 30 some odd minute show, and you are almost sort of like constrained when you're in New York or with great character actors all around you that you want to just cast everybody.
Courtney, forgive me for not knowing. I'm not sure if Blackish was built around Anthony Anderson or it was an existing project that he came to.
It was, in a way, like Kenya Barris, who created the show, and Anthony, they created it together. They went into the meeting at ABC with Lawrence Fishburne, and as I like to say, it's like they took a movie star, a guy who's in The Departed, and Kenya Barris, and told his story next to Morpheus. And so, like that was sold. But yeah, and again, I was a writer on the show for 6 years, 5 years before I started to run it. So I was gifted like the reins to an incredibly well running machine, and they knew me and I knew them, and I was very much set up to succeed because not only were they as talented as you could imagine, but incredibly kind and like kind to me in a way that does not have to happen, and so I was so much of this entire business is luck, and so I'm always the first one to cite when those moments of serendipity kind of happen, and for me, I was grateful to have that kind of opportunity.
At the same time, the show kept bringing in characters or adding on to this family, in unexpected ways, and really finding, like Daveed Diggs playing Beau's brother. Obviously, he's established. But Christina Anthony on Mixed Dish.
On Mixed Dish, yeah, she was great.
What is there sort of a key element into like bringing someone into that family?
It's funny. By the time I started to run the show, the first year was 2019. It was like we'd been on this is the 6th season at this point. And the thing about it is we got incredibly lucky. Like most shows, we hit gold with the kids. And that rarely happens. Like you're cast as a child actor when you're 10 years old to play 7 or 8. And it's a very specific thing. Marseille Martin, who played Diane on the show, she was like the wise Alex sister, kind of. Yeah. We knew what she was. She gave Jack trouble. Jack was the dumb brother. But you can grow out of that pretty quickly. And when you're getting onto season 6, 7, 8, 9, and you're telling stories about teenagers, if they don't have the ability to kind of like meet the moment, then their role has to kind of recede a little bit, and the show has to figure out ways to tell stories to compensate for that. I was gifted an opportunity because everybody was so talented, and those actors were so good that we just were allowed to grow as a show with them. So for me, it wasn't about like adding people. We never had to, as Yara went off and did Grownish, or as Marcus got older, figured out, well, how are we going to keep these dynamics working? We were able early on to add Jennifer Lewis, and so like really at that point, and we've got an office scene, with like Peter McKenzie and like Cole, and you're doing that. At a certain point, you're like, we got like 13 people we've got to service, and that the audience at this point is here to see. So like, it became a point where we never really, and it was a gift to us when we had to shoot during the pandemic, because, I'm always, and God bless TV streaming, it's all great the way it is now, but so much of television is about individuals talking. If you watch a clip of The Sopranos, it's actors talking. That's the whole show pretty much the entire time. And I remember watching us, we were getting to the pandemic, and I'm like, oh, thank God, we're a family show. We never have to create a reason why these people are in this house together talking.
Yeah.
You know, we never had to really deal with it. We dealt with it as we dealt with it in narrative, but like it was like, even if we needed them to be 6 feet apart to shoot, you could sit there and shoot deep and somebody's at the island and somebody's watching TV. Our solutions were ready, kind of made. So like it was a real crystallizing moment to me to see how well built the cast was. And like really, you know, we've talked about it, I think, when we talk about 21 and a half minutes, there's a real kind of like physics to these things. And if you're going to add somebody, that means you're kind of subtracting from somebody else. And so we were just really lucky to have, you know, be firing on all pistons.
It's an embarrassment of riches. And, you know, we've all seen that happen where someone on the show doesn't quite rise to the Cousin Oliver effect, you know, where like that character sort of gets shuttled off to the side. And it's all of your shows are like these wonderful ensembles where you really have so many people to write for. Patrick and Justin, you're also working with kids who I don't know if any of them are actual actors.
Most, this is like their first job.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you navigate that, and how were they cast?
Well, we have an amazing casting director, Wendy O'Brien and Chris Garrett, who Pat and I think we've worked on shows with kids before, and sort of we have like an allergy to like, they went through Disney,
Yeah.
you know, and they come in the audition, they're like, hi, I'm Jonas, and immediately you're like, this is we're not casting you, you know? Our joke is that they always seem like they're hosting a prank show. So we, and Quinta especially, we're like, we do not want any kids who feel like that. Like the key to the show is these kids feeling real. So we take that very seriously in the writer's room. We don't overwrite them. They're not overly precocious. But then we also try to like cast kids that, you know, are just real kids that come in and audition. And I mean, Pat, you should tell them the kid you just cast in the episode you directed.
Nate?
Yeah.
I don't know where this kid came from. Yeah, like two weeks ago, I got to direct an episode for the first time, and
congrats.
Thank you. I hired myself.
I think you should take back the claps.
Yeah.
It was
Can we do that? Yeah.
Give 'em
probably a union violation.
Without spoiling the plot, it's episode 6 this season 4. This kid came in and he was like, without being kind of that, having that like sort of Disney sparkle sheen, whatever you want to say, he carried himself like, as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, he carried himself like a 40-year-old. Or he was like, there was this one, we were doing a take and he was out in the hallway waiting to enter, and he's playing an 8-year-old. He is 8. and
That's our secret. We cast 40-years to play 8-year-olds.
Yeah. And he's like trying to flag down our first AD because he noticed that his wire was popping like out of his shirt. And he was just trying, and then it was like, they called action. I called action, and he was just like, yeah, screw it. And like went in there. He's like, I guess I'm not going to be able to use this take, but whatever. And this kid was like unbelievably polished. I mean, but it's a mishmash of like where these kids come from. Sometimes like they're plucked from like, like TikTok. Like they just have a thing that they do on TikTok, and you're like, well, you're perfect for,
I think we tend towards more raw. I mean, when we first started working on our very first show, we were doing with William Shatner, and we were doing a scene with there was a kid in the scene who was like 11, and we were getting ready to shoot, and we're all waiting for this kid who's like on a phone call, and Shatner walks over to him, and he's like, "Young man," and the kid goes, "1 sec, Bill." And that stayed with me to now. It will always be with me. It'll be my last memory. And so I think just like you can like when they just overwork the material at that age and they don't have quite the chops to do it. I think that's why we all kind of like love these sort of raw performances.
Has that kid ever heard from again?
I think Shatner maybe offed him. I don't know. I don't.
Because we do have so many actors here, I think what everyone really kind of wants to know is, the audition process. And if someone is lucky enough to get in a room with you to discuss a role, to audition, is there anything you would want them to know coming into that room? It always changes what you're looking for, but just things you think might help them to know.
I mean, I think our feeling is when you find somebody great, you adjust the part to them. So you have this idea in your head of what you wrote and you think it's so great, and then somebody comes in and they're fantastic. You're hurting yourself if you are not changing the character to fit that performer who is so great. So that's kind of the way we look at it, is adjust it to what an incredible performer does.
Are there people in your main cast that you've done that for, or did they all kind of come in perfect?
They kind of came in fully baked, I have to say. Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a couple examples. I mean, one, Jenelle James, who plays Ava, the principal on the show, she's incredible. Here. She was a writer and a stand-up, but hadn't really, like, she wrote herself a character on, was it Black Monday? I think she was on staff. But she came in and we did all of our casting during the pandemic, so it was all tapes. We weren't even live. If you're ever going to cast a show, do it during a pandemic. It's great. Okay. But she walked in on this pre-taped video, and we were like, well, that's her. But how are we gonna? That's Ava. But is the expectation that like the studio or the network is gonna want a name? And shockingly, they were like, that's her. Everybody was in lockstep, and then we just kind of wrote to Jenelle and then Chris Perfetti, who plays Jacob on the show. That character was, he was sort of the painfully sort of a presentational like woke guy, I guess, but like. He was a straight dude, and like Chris came in and we're like, well, like we're gonna write this to you, and the characters' relationships changed obviously on the show, and I mean he walked in and brought like so much nuance to that character that was like sort of like sixth down the call sheet, and we weren't going to be able to service him a ton in the pilot, and then Chris walked in and was like, again, holy shit. That's him. I don't care that like this character is not exactly written like him. That's it. You're him.
Wow.
And then again, the studio and the network agreed. And again, maybe that was because it was a pandemic. I don't know. But it was eerie how easy the casting process was for Abbott. And like part of it was Quinta wrote an amazing pilot, and everybody responded to it. And then she's just a lovely people person and is very, eloquent in explaining the themes and ideas of what she's got on her hands. And she met with Cheryl Lee Ralph, and she was like, yes. And, Lisa Ann Walter, like everybody was like our first choice. Like, there was no butting heads with anybody.
And I think, part of it is like you have to see someone and what they can become. When we did a pilot we did a show many years ago, and we were trying to cast the lead, and it was just like, we saw Timothée Chalamet came in and read. This is before he had really done anything. We were like, oh, this kid's great. And we had him audition, and the head of the network at the time was like, this kid can't fucking act. Like, absolutely not. And so
we're like, but it's the Lisan Al Gaib.
and so he was shot down. We didn't get to cast him, and it's just, I think, a testament to like as performers out there. It's just like one guy's or woman's opinion, and it doesn't define you as a performer. You just define the thing that somebody sees you for it.
John, was it awkward asking Meryl Streep to audition for season 3?
It was. What was more awkward was that her self-tape, I was like, I don't know.
Big choices.
Yeah, that was. Was it awkward? What was the question?
Oh, I was just teasing. I actually am curious about the casting process. If you'd want anything you'd want actors to know.
Yeah. Okay. So it's so interesting because it's this wealth of riches right now on our show with like the most amazing people. But thinking back in the early days too on those self tapes or with those moments when you're like sort of it was my first experience really being sort of in charge of that process of looking at self-tapes over and over again and seeing, and like, oh, I was feeling very empathetic and also the challenge of that and watching people be miraculous in that process and loving what they were doing. But I realized more and more what would make me stop or what would make me sort of, lean in a little bit more, because there were so many great people who were reading and doing the scenes beautifully. But then it was always something about the unique attributes of a human being, and they were just being themselves and leaning in. There wasn't a shying away from that or trying to step into the thing that maybe was in their minds or in their thinking is in the writer's mind. It was living and breathing in that person, and it was usually the specific qualities of that person that made me light up and go, I want more of them.
Yeah.
So that was always, and it's so funny when you were talking about casting kids. I made a movie many years ago, directed a family movie, and it was held at the center by like a 11-year-old kid. So that was a process. It was that all those Jonases were coming in. And,
Jonai.
Jonah? It was Jonah?
Jonai. Yeah, the plural of Jonas is Jonai.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. That's good to know, because that will live in my head for years. And I'll never forget, because this central character for this, and I had seen so many all over the country, meeting with these kids who were coming in to play this part. And the person I cast came into a room much like this and sat in a chair. And I said, okay, whenever you're ready, take your time, but whenever you're ready. And he said, okay. And nobody had done that. And he sat for, I want to say like a good minute. And I was so, and then he wasn't there until it was genuine. And I thought, and he didn't even have to utter anything. I was like, we've got him.
Yeah.
And it was one of those beautiful things of just a person who wanted to just be in the space of their own authentic self. And that oftentimes, I think, is what is the key to finding anyone special.
Courtney, for you?
It's funny, like mostly I end up talking to writers about how to impress writers or showrunners or all this other kind of stuff. And often I say like, this is the worst advice, because it does, so much of this doesn't sound useful or practical. It's like, write a great script and be yourself and authentic. And I think what everybody's echoing is what I would say too. It's like you're kind of looking for something different and magical and unique and authentic, and it sounds like just kind of like mumbo jumbo hogwash, kind of like non-specific, not helpful advice in a lot of ways. But like, I think that's the nice thing about having these conversations with other creative people who are also like optimistic and think about like why we engage in this and have our why sorted out, that you can kind of talk like this and people can get it. So I don't have a great answer to this. Like I've said with the writing thing, it is something unique and different. It's a point of view. It is you being you. It's having a point of view on the world, because what it does for me at least is I get curious and I go, I want to know more. I want to work with this person. And I wish I had like some just real practical advice to be able to say, here's what to do, even if it's just dumb lighting shit or whatever the kind of thing is. And I don't have it. It is. And it's so much easier to like, it feels like a way of just saying, be great at your job. But also like tap into what makes you want to do this in a way. And even, as writers, I think we're often, when we're approached with projects, we're sitting there going like, well, all right, this is not my biography. Why is this a metaphor that I'm drawn to? Why is this something that I can't stop thinking about? And so finding that kind of metaphorical story kind of way within a character and bringing that to us so that we all think about it either differently or positively or enhanced in a kind of way, that's kind of the magic, I think.
Can I just interrupt real quickly? Just to say, if you're like the thing you were looking for, the one thing I would say, if someone is wanting to know something that like maybe not to do, is because it can be helpful, honestly.
Please,
and I was like, wow, this is interesting, when like I wouldn't do that. And that hurt this guy's audition. Was there was a part, and it might have even called for like a prop or two you could use. And this person was using about 8. and it just and I just thought, oh, this is terrible.
Carrot Top.
I know it was terrible because I was like rooting for, I root for the people, everyone, to come in and do something great because you're solving all the problems, and I was like, oh no, so I would share that.
Yeah.
Like, don't overprop yourself because you'll be like, oh no, you're taking my focus away from you.
What did he have? Like a bag of tricks?
No, it was literally like popping out things and doing.
Wow.
He'd go off screen and come on with the thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, and it was a tough go, and it was clever in theory, I'm sure in his mind, but it was unfortunate because I was like, oh, I'm losing him.
And off of that, and this sounds very basic, but you'd be shocked how many times, like, you say the words that are on the sides. Because it happens a lot and it's not just people not necessarily being, or whatever, it's like, I have other words. So that's pretty much immediately disqualifying.
Yeah. No, it's sometimes these things that seem so obvious and basic, just people need to hear, I think. Meaghan, for you?
Along with the prop thing, and this is probably just me because I hate the sound of chewing. Like, don't eat in your audition. Don't like it's gross and it's distracting. Don't be like slurping on a drink. It's so shocking how many people do that in self-tapes. And yeah, but I mean, it is hard to give really good advice because it is about that magic in the room. The guy who plays Steven, Jackson White, he sent in this tape that was the weirdest audition I've ever seen in my life. It was just utterly bizarre. He had Ace of Base playing in the background. He was dressed ridiculously. He was walking in and out of the frame, but it was so confident that I was like, whoever this is confident enough to play this psycho character, and I just want to meet him. But, that doesn't work for every character in every script. I also would say ask questions. I think a lot of times it's so hard to know the tone or specific direction things without actually talking to anyone, and you're studying these scenes off alone in your house and you have questions, and so often people are afraid to ask. And ask, if you're like, what is the tone? Is it this or is it that? Just ask, because we want you to do a good job, Yeah.
And something Courtney touched on is that, if someone comes in and makes an impression, they might not get that role, but I'm imagining you'll remember them down the line.
Can I tell about that one?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, that's exciting. You just went right where I was thinking, because I'll never forget in season 1 we had an actress come in, and again, this kind of counters what I was saying about the props a little bit, but like she had a good microphone. So she was coming into ultimately was going to be played by Tina Fey. Cinda Canning, and a podcaster, but there was an audition. It was self-tape, and it just came up, and she had this kind of fabulous microphone, and she was speaking into it. But what was really great about it, Adina Verson, she later played Poppy, Cinda Canning's assistant.
Oh.
It was significant in the show because of this, and it was one of those moments of the audition was informing me very directly by reading, and the way in which she spoke and her the ease and the understanding of the joke, how a podcaster sounds, and the way the cadence and the little touches of very delicate choices she had made were riveting to me. And I ended up showing people this, like, can you please just watch this? Because the way she sounded, the way I was like, I want to see her podcast. But it was so simple. But it was great because it just communicated so much more than anyone, that's the other thing. It's sort of like when you find someone who's elevating.
Well, again, thank you all so much for being here, for entertaining us for years.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a great audience.